Our podcast is a tool for learning, and we're taking it further on Patreon. By supporting us, you'll gain access to exclusive reading episodes where we unpack key texts and ideas, plus early access to interviews with radicals and revolutionaries. Your contribution helps to make these resources more accessible and impactful. Visit patreon.com/the Dugout Pod to support our work.
Hello and welcome to the Dugout. Oh my gosh, we have bangers for you. If you've been fucking with our interviews recently, just wait, because this one right now and the next couple, out of the water. This next week, or maybe these next 2 weeks, because we had some good conversations. We're talking to Nia Ullah. Nia's an Afro-pessimist, cultural critic, TikTok commentator, essayist on Substack who dissects the intersections of desire, power, and the limits of freedom. Their work delves into the radical possibilities of sexuality, the hauntings of anti-blackness, and the way that pleasure and horror intertwine. Whether exploring the grotesque, the erotic, or the unsettling truths of existence, Nia moves beyond surface-level conversations, always asking, what does it mean to want, to be seen, and to be denied? Check them out on their Substacks, That Deep, and Shaken Sheets on the Talk and the Instagram. We'll have all that linked.
Prince here, everyone. I really loved this interview. It's just really cool when we get to interview people that are immediately really just open and warm and really accessible in the way that they explore and think about and approach things. Like, one thing that I really took away from this conversation was I really enjoyed diving into their thoughts and experiences and frameworks around sex work and the decriminalization of it versus the legalization of it. And I really enjoyed talking to them about essentially what it means to talk about politics online, what it means to engage in politics, and to be someone that is a resource for other people, is learning and trying to help other people learn, and how we really need to turn away from the instant gratification that social media can offer when it comes to talking about politics. And as I believe Nia said, go outside and touch grass. So go outside and touch grass, smoke some grass, eat some grass.
Because of Nia, we will actually have a lot of green things coming down the road, meaning there's going to be a Shrek movie radical review coming down the line, and we're going to be greened out. So thank you, Nia, for that recommendation. Yeah, I'm really excited for folks because this is one of those moments where I'm like, this is an interactive archive and we're building it in real time. Nia is a contemporary cultural critic that is a part of a lineage of struggle and revolution, and to be able to be in conversation and dialogue is, one, an honor, but also what we have to continue to do as revolutionaries, as people with an instinct to build better futures for ourselves and to stay curious. We hope that this indulges on that human need to learn. So our first question is one that we ask everyone, and I think it's just good grounding, which is, what was a young Nia Ullah like? Where do you grow up? Themes or things that you consider influential?
Well, I would say if I were to look at my childhood, I was just a very curious child. I think that's kind of maybe the through line for my entire life. I was always asking questions. I always wanted to know more about things. I was never really like someone who could be satisfied by like whatever the immediate answer to something was. I'm lucky in the sense that like I was the right kind of curious, because I think curiosity can lend you also to be like very conspiratorial, but that never like is where I went. I was just always like, there seems to be more to know. So I was very knowledge seeking since I was young, and I was very precocious about it. And I've always like been very kind of outspoken in general. I was one of those kids that would get like great student, very loud, like, great kid, always talking. And I'm like, there's more to say. So I just think I was very mouthy, and I was trying to be intellectual for a long time, but a lot of it too had to do with, where and how I was growing up. I mean, I grew up in NYCHA projects. So I grew up in New York City's like housing projects in the Bronx. And my mother was like very big about like our primary education at schools, but also what she was doing at home. So I was really in a house that was like rewarding a lot of this curiosity, because we had like a really low literacy rate of the borough, and that like we had a really high prison recidivism rate. And there was all of this work, because she was organizing, that she knew, and she just wanted to like assure she had children who were like not only asking questions, being rewarded for those questions. So I think I just grew up in a place that was like expecting me to think a lot. And also, if what I was thinking didn't quite get to where I was going, there was a lot of patience to like let us get there. So as a child, I very much like I am today, very precocious, very inquisitive, very like people oriented and in love with conversation and how I can relate to other people. And I think that's like ultimately what's continued to steer my life and like its ethos. This idea of like, I mean, I always tell people it's like one of the things that comes up a lot in my videos: get curious, be curious. I think curiosity has genuinely been what shaped me since childhood, and it's kind of led me to like a lot of really interesting places. So I would say like a young Niala has just been a very curious little kid who was like annoyingly persistent about asking questions. You know, like the adults at some point are like, go somewhere, like go find a toy. I don't want to talk anymore. And I'm like, why not? I was just like a really young, curious child, and like very deeply connected to this idea that we did share some all-encompassing existence. I didn't quite know what that meant for me yet, but I did think it endeared me to people a lot as well. So I just kind of always felt like I was connected to the world and to the people who were, you know, experiencing the world with me, and how I was using my brain to steer the ship for years. So very much like I am today, obviously a lot less refined, definitely wasn't cursing nearly as much, but very much the same in that regard.
I find it interesting when people have parents who organize on some capacity, because I'm sure that impacted your perspective of politics. So could you kind of talk about what that was like, having parents that were involved, and then also how you would describe your own radicalization kind of journey?
So my mother, she was a labor organizer primarily for 35 years, about prior to retirement, and she continues to. That was like really imperative growing up. Like some of my earliest memories are like listening to her on like calls with other organizers and with community members, organizing things for strikes, trying to like help people unionize, helping people figure out their like labor rights in the workplace. And so I like remember being around people who were like refused to sit back. I think it made me very restless being around somebody who was like always go, 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 like working full-time jobs. She has kids. She's like, you know, always doing these things. I think in part that was encouraging for me as well. Cause I'm like, okay, you can kind of do it all if you have to. It shaped my worldview in the sense that I never felt totally helpless about the things that were happening in my life. I think that my mother was like so afraid just from the way that she grew up that like I would almost, or any of us would be kind of like paralyzed into some level of victimhood where it's like, oh my God, all of this shit is horrific. Like the world is a sucky place. How can I ever do anything about it? Being able to like watch her like make gains, but also like kind of like try to gracefully take losses and stuff was like really impactful for me. Going to rallies, and I remember like taking the train with like big ass signs, like to go down to like marches. Having that experience as a child and it being introduced to me in a way that was like appropriate in the sense like I'm doing this for this, you know, very simple complexes at first. You know, she's not like going into like, you know, the prison industrial complex, all of these like huge, large radical thought. She was really big about like the building blocks of it all. So if I'm like, hey, why are you doing this? She's like, well, you know, companies don't like workers. Like, you know, so she's starting like very basic work. So I think it actually made it a lot easier when I started to come into like my own true political identity, that I had roots that weren't necessarily rooted in one specific type of praxis or theory. And it was more just like you're at risk of like a level of exploitation that is very specific to who you are. And there are things you can do to try to combat that. And so being in a house with somebody who was doing as much as they could and also learning how to shrug it off was like really impactful and inspiring a lot for me. My mother, like, to this day is somebody who I genuinely regard as one a really great political theorist, but just one of the best examples I've ever seen of really trying to kind of like juggle all the plates. And I'm not sure how active or effective I would have been in my own political organizing or activism as I age had I not seen those types of examples so young. Because again, like, you know, once the world like really gets in all of this indoctrination that is coming from like dominant social groups and like American cultural hegemony, it's really easy to almost forget the things that you saw that worked. And so I think being confronted by like what worked all the time and what didn't work and what you kind of have to take time to see whether it worked or not, it was really impactful. My father didn't organize. My father was like a regular like blue collar man, but my mother was, and he wasn't like apolitical, but that's not his skill set. Like it's just not his skill set. And so my mother really being like this like motivating force, this lightning rod for this type of work, and then having a father who was like grounded in that same reality, but a lot more pedestrian and mundane. I do think that helped as well, because it would be really easy if it was like maybe just my mother and like they were both doing like this very heavy level. Obviously that it would feel like legacy, but also this is all I can do. Like what she's doing, what they're doing, I have to do it like this. And I think that him kind of like in his own way trying to like help an aid, not as like publicly facing or actively, showed me like there's a couple different modes to this, and that's a good thing. And so I think that that was really impactful for me growing up. To this day, I do think that my childhood a lot of the time is lucky. I say that to people all the time. Like, despite whatever strife I experienced, I do think I really enjoyed my childhood in that sense. I was really lucky in that sense to be around somebody who was always thinking, always curious, who was constantly communing with other people in ways that would try to help each other. And I think watching that work and then not work, over the years was like, I needed that. I think that I don't know if I would have come into the political identity I did. I don't know if I would have started any kind of real organizing or activism as young as I did, because I started in my teens. And I do think that that wouldn't have happened had I not been in a household with somebody who was doing it, and someone who wasn't trying to like hide what she was doing from me. Because I do, I'm not the only person I know who have parents who have organized and things of the nature, but a lot of them were kind of like shielded from a lot of it young as a way of like preserving childhood or like preserving some level of innocence, which is totally understandable. Like, again, we're adultified as it is, like in a racial capacity. So it's like you want to give your kids as much childhood as you can. But I think my mom was like really trying to walk some kind of line where it's like you can be a kid, just be an aware kid. And I do think that the way that she went about it was useful for me. I don't think it would have been useful for everybody. It really was a perfect case scenario when it comes to forming a later political identity. And it's still something that like I will refer back to her, and like me and her can have these conversations and like these lengthy discussions and debates. And that still is, helping to shape how I view the world. And I notice as I've gotten older that I've like helped change her views in some ways. And that was really remarkable as well for somebody to be doing this for so long. I think there's this level of almost like insecurity sometimes where you're like, our elders, they're profound, they've done this work. Like you're not sure how much you can contribute to their knowledge or to their understanding of the world. And so being able to like watch her be willing to take direction and kind of like take a step back to let somebody else kind of like steer a ship if it made more sense, I think that was really impactful in this journey for me. And I think it made it so that I was coming into this expecting a level of like coalition building and community works that maybe everybody isn't expecting.
Yeah, I love, and this is rare to see, honestly, still, is that's why I love working with families directly, is like having that intergenerational conversation. And it's because I always get to see also myself and everyone as well, because like that, my parents always said my favorite words were why or why not. And it's just like that honing in on that drive for curiosity and keeping that alive in like a healthy and meaningful way that's still going towards some sort of communal truth. Not something that has to be right for everyone all the time, but for something that works for right now and we can move forward with. As such a curious child and an intellectual, what is your relationship with education and being an educator, and how you feel that dynamic has played even with your roles with family, friends, community? And especially I love the role that children play with their parents, and like, yes, we take so long to learn from them, but then we also are educators, and education is always in my head a two-way street. I'm kind of curious how that is broken down for you and the way you move through the world.
I think we have a pretty similar view. I think that I never expected education. I think especially in the house that I grew up in with my mother, and like this curiosity being like the steering force of our lives, I didn't ever think that education was necessarily hierarchical. Like I didn't think you had to earn, per se, access to be someone who could give other people something. I always saw education as like a very like egalitarian practice. We are trying to help each other. The whole point is for us to know enough of the same things to build on whatever it is that we're trying to build. And so I've always found education like very deeply important. I think also just in general, in like the institutional way, I've always felt education was important, because again, like if it weren't important, we wouldn't be barred from it. like it's just one of those things. Like, if education didn't matter, like it would be easy to get to. They wouldn't have made it so inaccessible. And so I've always thought that education honestly is like steering the ship for most of these things, because we wouldn't really be in half the places that we are had foundations been set and then allowed to be maintained. And so for me, education is all about like, how do I democratize information? How do I make it accessible to people? I'm constantly just trying to remind myself that like we are obviously all coming from different places with like different modes of thought, and the way that we learn to think about the world and rationalize it with other people isn't going to look the same. And so I try to like lead still with like a level of, I could not have this full picture. Like what I'm telling you could just be like maybe like 30%, it could be 60%. But like I do think this is something of value to give to people. And so for me, it's just always been like a very active exchange. And I think that it's something that we see beautifully all the time intergenerationally. I think one of the maybe most common examples that seems like benign, but is like really important, is how you'll have like older generations not be great at tech. And then you're like 10 years old or 11 years old teaching like a boomer or a silent gen how to do something on a phone or email. And it seems like it doesn't matter in the grand scheme of things, but it does. The point is, we come into the world with access to a certain level of literacy, depending on where and how we were born. And I do think that there is, to some degree, like a communal obligation to try to get us on the same page about certain things, but that requires us having at least a functioning baseline. And so for me, education is all about like, what is our baseline? What are we trying to seek? And like, how do we get there? And whether or not we have to get there through the methods and means that we have been taught can educate you. I think that even when we talk about education, if you talk about it in like the macro sense, people are literally, quite literally, only thinking about like K through 12 in college. That's not what, that's not the extent of education. And so it's like education can be like a daily walking, moving practice where you are just going through the road curiously and you are showing other people what your curiosity has led to and allowing them to kind of like give you some input as well. So education has always been really important to me, mostly because I know how important it is to just society and to us as people. But I also think that education in a lot of ways is sometimes like what makes us human. This idea of like the master species of the world, because we are like bipedal and, we walk around and we can talk and we have like access to all of this technology and we do these types of things. Education is very humbling to some degree to be like, you still don't know. You can be from like the species or whatever, like humans, feel like this is our earth. It's not really something that we do communally anymore, which is obviously because of like colonialism and such. I think that there is something very humbling about centering education because that requires an innate ability to say, I don't know now. Like someone doesn't know now, or I don't know it all, and I want to know it all, or rather, I want to know more. And so I think that it's really important for education to be seen as something that isn't like literal level of development that you hit and then you just kind of abandon. It's also one of the reasons why I think a lot of people hesitate to call themselves educators, even if that's the primary way that they do any kind of activism or organizing, because there's like a very stringent understanding of educators. Like, you don't have a PhD, or I'm not a teacher. We don't learn everything in school. Like, that's kind of the point. You can learn everywhere. Culturally speaking, we have an odd relationship to education because of like all of the formalities. Generally, I think that education is like a very humbling and person-oriented experience to have, where you want to know more about each other and you want to teach things to each other. And I think it's something that we share with other animals on the planet, with like other species on the planet. Like, everybody's curious of each other. Everybody's seen like a video of like an octopus like staring at like a person and like trying to touch them and stuff. Like, we're just curious creatures, all of us. And I think that education at its core is about rewarding each other's curiosity and trying to democratize access to the education people are seeking. I mean, so much is inaccessible exclusively because of like academia and like this really superfluous language and the belief that everybody is able to get to that same place, or the literacy is functioning in the same way, because there are a lot of people who like couldn't sit through like some like stuffy academic paper that like I can have a conversation with and they know what's happening. They know what's being said in it. It's just not accessible in that way. So for me, education is all about how do we make this as accessible for everybody as possible, and also how can I continue to reinvent what it is that I know in a way that meets more people. That makes you, to me, I think, a lot smarter. Having to be clever about the way that you introduce things to people and how you explain them to people makes sure you truly start to really understand whatever it is that you are trying to give to people, because you're like, damn, how can I explain this other ways? And then once you're able to simplify or kind of like move it along or make it a comparative method that people can see it in other places, it becomes crystallized a lot more where education sits in the world and how we can use education, how we have used education, how I think in a lot of ways we kind of don't use education enough because we think it's specific to institution. We think it's specific to academia. And it's like, no, like education is something you can do your entire life.
I feel like what you're saying is so fascinating because it's one of the reasons I was super interested in this interview. This is like a lot of different questions in one. How or where did you practice that skill? Like, I'm sure some of that came from your mother and other spaces that you were in, like the commitment to wanting to explain and explore things in an accessible way to other people, I think is an interesting thing for someone who's like choosing to engage in a part of their life in politics online. So I guess I just wonder how you look at that practice, or where do you think the practice of just like even having like a simple, accessible conversation about politics, how are you approaching that in this moment in time?
I'm always at least trying to find some kind of common ground. As that's like usually like my first step. I want to like find some common ground. I want to find some baseline we can both start at that like I can genuinely tell we're both kind of really on the same accord, and then see if I can build on that with whatever else I'm trying to deliver to people. And I try to like stay tapped into the anxieties a lot of people have around the topics they don't know, because I do think that is a large part of it. Like, it's hard to have political conversations with people because people are anxious, and like politics is like this big scary thing. Like, genuinely, it like functions like apparatus. Like, people are paralyzed sometimes by the fear of not understanding. They think it's so complex, they think it's so dense, they think it's only meant for like these highbrow academics. No, but I can see that anxiety. So I'm going to try to meet you in a place where this feels, even if it doesn't feel political, if I can like slide something political in there, I will. Like, or have a conversation with someone, we'll have like a normal conversation, and I'll be like, that's politics. Like, what we just talked about is politics. And like giving people a frame of reference, because again, all of this stuff is taken very literally. You know, like people quite literally think like politics is your politicians, the president, the branches. And it's like, yeah, but people don't know where like the politics starts and stop. And I think it's overwhelming for people. And I know a lot of people have told me it's overwhelming to think about the fact that it really is all encompassing, in the sense your life is impacted entirely by the politics of various communities as well as various power structures. And so I just try to put people in a place where they feel like comfortable having the conversation about politics, but also knowing that it doesn't mean that they have to know everything about it, or that this knowledge isn't innately scary. That's why we say the whole ignorance is bliss thing, right? People don't want to know, because if you know, you can't unsee it. And so it's like trying to almost appease people's anxieties about it, about the fact that once you do understand this thing, it will become more impactful to you, because you'll know how it is truly impacting you. For me, whenever I try to have these conversations, especially online, because as we all know, the internet is very polarizing. That's how it's intended to work, especially in like the days of social media. Like, the point is to get reactions out of people. And so it's like, you want to be the person who's like, I'm getting a reaction out of you, but I don't want the reaction to be fear. I don't want it to be anxiety. You know, I don't want it to be dread. I want the reaction to be like, I never thought about that. Or like, maybe this is worth looking up. Like, why I try like stay as pedestrian in a way as I can. I'm very normal. I think people feel like there's this obligation. Once you start to talk about politics and stuff, you have to be like full-time sister soldier. Like your whole life, everything that you do is, you know, about like uplifting yourself from the man. And it's like,
Even looking at your TikToks today, I love that you were talking about Shrek and how radical
yeah,
Shrek is and these other things.
yeah.
Because I think what you're speaking to, and I really resonate with it, because when I started organizing, it was around like 2014 when Black Lives Matter popped off. And it was my first experiences canvassing for like a protest that I was doing. And I remember being at my predominantly white university, and the way I would talk to people was be like, did you know that this thing happened in like another part of the country? Do you feel like we can be more clear about culture and cultural competency here? And so it was interesting, because instead of it being explicitly political, I think what you're speaking to is the emotional work that people bring to their political lives, and how that often becomes this obstacle, or like a way to procrastinate it, or it becomes difficult. And when we're given this political mainstream world where it's also technical, and then our lives are driven by the emotion that bring us to our politics. Yeah, I really like how you explain that.
One, I think communication is power. And I think one of the main powers it has to do is also to help break, like, I view helplessness as like an actual like emotion, like a really raw feeling, and how to navigate that. And not only have conversations where people can think about things materially differently, but also just think about the conversation itself as something impactful. So I'm kind of curious, how do you feel like you work around the feeling of helplessness that you can see around others, or in that anxiety?
Helplessness is like a really, it's a hard thing to work around. I think like because like the problem is like helplessness doesn't sit alone, right? Like, you're feeling helpless, and like it naturally invites all of these other feelings. So like, once you feel helpless, it's this increased anxiety. It's a bit of paranoia involved, where it's like, okay, I can't do shit about this. I mean, what's gonna happen? There's all this dread. Helplessness fills you for like a tunnel of fear. And I think the problem with fear for a lot of people, which is a natural response, is very paralyzing. To be like, oh my God, this is something that is real and big and impactful. What does this mean for me? Anytime I'm presenting information, I try to, if I can, add like a little nugget of hope within the information that I'm packing in, even if it's like essentially a trauma sandwich, where it's just like, they did this and this to us, and this is why we're here. But like, there's a victory here, and there are victories in here. I think people are so used to the doom and gloom in a lot of ways, especially in the last 20 years. I blame the 24-hour news cycle. The internet has become the 24-hour news cycle. You could be scrolling right before bed thinking you're gonna like look at cat videos, and then somebody's like, breaking news, you're not a person. Like nobody, like, you know what I mean? So it's like, how could you not fall into helplessness? This is just your life. You genuinely can't escape it. And that actually, I think, is a deterrent for a lot of people as well, where they're like, I have no escape from this. I have no break from this. If this is genuinely my life, if I have to see it online, if I have to deal with it in the workplace, if I have to do this when I'm just like walking out on the street, then I'm never, like, I'm screwed. So I think for me, the helplessness is I want to acknowledge it first. I want to be sympathetic and empathetic towards it because I understand why it's happening. But I also want to tell people that there is a way to break yourself out of this helplessness. Like, this helplessness is something that if you make these other decisions I'm talking about, it could potentially cure it. You won't feel helpless if you do these things. I think people don't even realize how impactful it is to just have like one step to do. It's one of the reasons why like politicians, they love to be like, oh, like postcard parties, phone banking, there's always something to do. And I think that people, once they do the thing once, it does look a little more, it colors in the lines a lot. I think we see that a lot on social media. I saw recently a girl who was Gen Z and she had gone to her first protest. It moved her, like it really moved her. She was like, oh my God, this many people care. I thought it was hopeless. This helps. So sometimes it's just encouraging people to like dip their toe into one thing, see what this is about, like see how that makes you feel. See if you can maintain your feelings of helplessness when you are around people trying to do shit with you and who want to support you in that quest. I'm trying to like acknowledge why you're scared, but I'm also like, step out the door for a second, see what's out there. And then if it's still scary, like we can have a, secondary conversation. But typically speaking, I want to always root people in the reality that helplessness, you can go through like waves of it. I've not always been super optimistic. Again, that's why they call it radical optimism. Every day is not a day that's like, guys, we going out, we killing it, we going to change the world, we going to get our aims met.
Sometimes they beat our ass.
Right. Like sometimes you come home bloody and shit. You like, damn, like why was I out there? Like, did they just jump me? Like, what just happened? It's a real feeling. And so I never want to act like, I never want to be the person, because I also think that makes you seem to people less credible if you're the person that only wants to talk about when it works. I'm like, no, babe, it don't always work. We cry ourselves to sleep too. But even the fact like that you've tried, the efforts towards seeking whatever it is that you are trying to get for you and other people's like collective liberation, that sometimes is enough to keep you going till the next victory. People need to know that like it is a wave of helplessness. Like you don't have to ride it for your whole life. See if you still feel helpless after doing this. See if you still feel helpless after doing that. I think also a lot of people don't know necessarily how impactful things that seem very mundane can be political. Recently, I was talking to somebody and she was like, I genuinely don't know what to do. I live in rural America. I'm like, what about a community garden? Like, do you have neighbors close enough for a community garden? And she's like, I never thought about that. And then I got like a DM months later where she's like, oh my God, we have like this community garden working now and I feel so connected to my neighbors and people don't suck. And I'm like, cool. Like, I'm glad that worked out. It doesn't always have to be so on its face innately like political act that you're doing that can break these feelings. It's just about, I think, getting people into spaces where they're being rewarded for community. People are able to show up for them and where they can see people want to show up for them. I think so much of this is in a way learned helplessness that is built in by the political apparatus we have. The point is in a way to keep us complacent with the two-party system. It's almost very paternalistic, right? To be like, oh, this stuff is so complex. You have hard enough lives. Things are big. Let us do the big things. You guys focus on your relationships and being a like wage slave to capitalism. And we're like, okay, you know what I mean? And then people are like, this isn't working. We're being told like, oh, it's not working because you're not letting the people do the big things. And it's like, maybe it's not working because they're not supposed to do these things. Maybe it's not working for something else. Right. You can get people closer to that place where they really start to like question and interrogate the system that they're in and whether or not it works once they realize other people are asking those questions, like they really see it. I think online, as sometimes part of the problem that to like really get to people is the fact that like we are ultimately people in a screen. So it's like you do once. I know it has to feel isolating for people to like only see this online, to only be able to have these conversations in very small spaces that are essentially, once you get out into the world, they seem like a non-factor. Encouraging people to get into spaces where they're just communing with other people, like that is half the work, because people need to understand you're not the only one thinking about this. You're not the only one who has this anxiety. You're not the only one who feels helpless right now. So like setting people up to like at least try to be with other people. One of the best steps you can do, because we are by design of capitalism, like very isolated, told that this isolationism is what's protecting us. And I'm like, if that were the case, everybody would be living like a hunky dory life. But
Yeah,
people,
there wouldn't be a loneliness epidemic.
Right, exactly. There would not be a loneliness epidemic. I think that all of us have kind of like clocked this shift as well, where it's like you have the loneliness epidemic at the same time that everybody's like, nobody owes me shit. We're walking through this world alone. It's very like almost rugged individualism. One, it's giving very much like frontier, the Western frontier. Like this is very Lewis and Clark. This is very colonial. People don't realize that, but it's like, someone is rocking you to sleep. Like somebody wants you to feel like this. I think that it also helps people realize like, oh wait, like it's not just this myth of, oh, it's a few bad apples, or like we just need better people within the system. If that were the case, they would not be like militantly extinguishing works that disband their total power. If you had no power, and I think that's what people need to see as well, and that's why Going Outside is very impactful. They are trying to rob you of power because they know this is powerful. Collectivism is powerful. Being in a real community that does works is powerful. They don't want you to have it, you know?
Everything you're saying reminds me. One of the recent things that I saw you post about that I really loved was how you talked about how convenience and time are both constructs that, well, especially convenience is like something that we're dealing with sociopolitically in the West, and how that instant gratification is also like leaning into our social and political lives. And I found that to be so true.
And it's something I think about a lot as an anarchist. One thing people always put on me is like, oh, you just want that shit now. And I'm like, well, I'm about direct action. I'm going to do something now, but I still believe there are things to do and it's a process. And like having that real timeline or understanding of like even just generational and like societal growth and people being born into new systems and how that changes the whole landscapes of ideas and how that needs to be respected.
Also just makes me think, to your point about getting people to take that first step to be in space with other people, to be in proximity, because I don't know, like the internet isolates so many people, then they start entering their process of politicization through what they see online. I think especially for younger folks being post lockdown, all of the gaps in what people wanted to experience or could or couldn't experience, the impacts of long COVID. It's kind of what we've been speaking to, and like we've been doing other interviews, and we interviewed some Black Panthers recently, and they really did come back to community, like spend time with each other. When I look at the news and I'm in my bed alone scrolling, what's gonna brighten my day? It's when my co-host comes over and then we smoke a little weed or something. And it does feel like that is really like the first step, especially for people that are trying to engage with it on these platforms or in these more kind of individualized ways. I don't know.
Part of the problem, and it's something I've thought about in length, because I mean, like, a large part of my work is online, but like I didn't get my start online. So like having to shift this type of talk to the internet made this very clear to me. When we talk about younger generations as well, like if we're looking at Gen Z specifically and then Gen Alpha, because they are now tweens, almost some of them. And so it's like looking at these generations, there was a huge shift. I mean, like we know like millennials are digital pioneers, Gen Z are digital natives. So it's like your entire social life, depending on how old you are, was crafted online. And so it's like, that's how you view the world. That feels more real in a lot of ways than whatever is happening outside. You want whatever is happening online to be impactful. You want it to make sense to people, but you also want it to like not fully reward them. Like you want it to be like, yeah, this is maybe like 30%. If you want the rest, go outside. I know people like take it very, you know how it is. Everybody's always like, the generation before you is just curmudgeonly and just everybody is like, touch grass. Millennials love saying it. Like nobody wants to hear that. You know, like if your entire digital life, what you feel like is really your truest life, maybe your most authentic life, nobody wants to hear this life isn't real, go outside. So it's like, I'm never going to tell you that, but I'm going to be like, how much is this really giving you? If you could do it all online, wouldn't it be done already? There's something you're missing that you just can't get here. Let yourself find it. Give yourself the opportunity to find it. When we think about everything that has occurred in social media activism in the last 15 or so years, a lot of this is about, or at least as it was intended, was like just a way to galvanize people toward the outside. Like, you know, when we think about the start of BLM, when I think about Mike Brown, Trayvon Martin, earliest cases that really formed the organization and this ethos, it was all about incensing people to go outside with other people who cared about the same thing. You know, like, so obviously we're all writing the hashtag and we're sharing coordinations and we're talking about like, oh, this is where this is happening, this is where that is happening, are you going to be there? That's the point. Are you going to be there? It's not enough to just know it's happening. It's not enough to want this to work. You have to like see what you really think. For a lot of people, it's very politically clarifying to get outside for the first time. That's something I'm always talking about. I mean, I've said it before in videos. People did not like it, but I was like, a lot of you don't battle test your politics. You think these things. And then it's, where are you actually showing you think these things? You can't do that online well. Praxis, it just doesn't work. And it's something I've experienced a lot. These conversations, we all saw it at the start of the election, this idea that's like political purity, moral purity. Like no one's going to be perfect. Sure, but what are you doing to be better? Yes.
Or what does integrity look like to you outside of critiquing others?
Like it's a question, and I think it's something a lot of people can't answer because they've not tested their politic at all in the world in a way that they can tangibly see. A lot of people are maybe misunderstanding where the sacrifice lies. Like the sacrifice doesn't lie in knowing these things. The sacrifice is truly like, are you going to sacrifice yourself? Are you going to sacrifice your community? Because like to me, those are typically the only real options. And like this is something I've talked about a lot since I was a kid, you know, especially with my mother, where it's like this idea that it's all wrapped up in this odd Christo-fascist martyrdom that is all around, where it's like if it's not in service to the thing they told you it's in service to, it's useless. And so like any sacrifice made that is not in service to this larger system then is an ineffective sacrifice. And I'm like, no, like you can get rewards for the things that you are choosing not to do anymore. I think people don't realize their own personal power, and having to sacrifice, being around people who are doing these things and like still happy is also part of it too. People think you genuinely have to live like a horrific, horrible, like always like, you know, doom and gloom life. If you don't go outside and test this shit with other people, you don't see who's doing it well, who's trying to juggle it, who's maybe having the same concerns as you. So it's like these things are not novel. It goes back to the individualist. A lot of people think they're the only one experiencing these concerns. They're the only one asking these questions. You're not, but like you're not going to find all the answers here. You got to keep moving. People think it's about purity or like this moral purity or this political purity, but it's like, no, words mean things. Like, and like ultimately speaking, if you genuinely think you believe this, what do you have to show for it? You know, once I really developed a very small, when I was like baby organized, developing this identity, like I had to have some core that propelled me outside, something I truly believed in. It's hard for me to conceive the ability to like fervently believe something and then not try to get whatever it is that you believe to the aims that you're seeking. I think a lot of people, it's still very much like, again, abstract. It is an abstract thought. I think people think that like thinking they deserve like healthcare is enough. They think that like, you know, your grandma shouldn't, you know, be dying damn near on fixed income is enough. Like people think just like, oh, base is enough. Like it is like, I don't know if that, I don't think it is. How does that differentiate you from the milquetoast voter who's going to go to the polls every presidential election, not even midterms, like presidential election, and be like, I checked the box, hand me my sticker, politics.
I am Gen Z, and I came into politics through environmentalism. And what does go into like a rally to then increase taxes or anything else look like? And what does that mean to like work within the system, sit down with meetings with my state senator, get something passed, and then watch it get co-opted and all this stuff? And I'm like, oh, okay. The rigmarole is happening. And people did try to tell me, but I had to go through it first to see, okay, there are different ways to move through, like to really battle test, even just like, I want the environment to be better, or like, we're fucked, what can we do? And even just bringing that mentality to other spaces was a really broad, rude awakening, really, like depressing awakening to, oh, I know people cared, but I didn't know it was like, oh yeah, at this point we know we can make money. And this is not good for my legacy, or this is like you read shit like that. What is Afro-pessimism to you, and how does that framework ever inform your mode of analysis?
Well, I think probably it's where I like came to view the world in general. I mean, my mother was an Afro-pessimist or is an Afro-pessimist. It's really odd too, because that's kind of the beauty of being able to age, where it's like she's older than the theory. like she was already doing work before this had been fully fleshed out. So she came into this later as it was forming, and then she was like, yeah, no, that's me. And it just kind of like was the way that she chose to educate her kids. I think for me, and again, that goes back to the foundations of education, I didn't even know it was called Afro-pessimism until I hit like maybe 15, 16. It was just about introducing these concepts. Once the foundation was there, she's like, so that's this. If you want to learn more about this, you can read like these kind of like lengthier, thicker, denser texts about it. I think Afro-pessimism, and I've talked about this in videos because like people have asked me to clarify more so what it is. I think a lot of folks think that it's like an inherently almost nihilistic point of view, to like have your subjugation be rooted in your analysis of the world, to like know that ultimately like any way that you move through the world, blackness is informing it first, everything else is informing it in an almost tertiary capacity after that. And so it was like this idea that this designation that was placed on me and millions of other people was always going to impact my world as long as this world used this like racial caste system in order. There was something kind of freeing for me in that. I think it made me less prone to think that it was like about making like white folks see us. Oh no, like they see us fine. Like that's why we're black. like they see us fine. That's the point. They see you. They said you're black. They did this on purpose. Part of it broke the inertia. It was very crystallizing who was doing what and why. I think that for a lot of people, that's something that comes later in a political identity, and that can be in and of itself radicalizing, but it could also discourage a lot of people to be like, shit, like this is really the umbrella that will always hang over my head. Like as long as we are using race, you will be a proprietary class, because that's what blackness was built out to be. That's like a really difficult thing to sit in, like this, oh my God, like I really was expected to labor and die in service of white capitalism. Like that's genuinely what they expected me. Like, that's the point of my existence within this larger framework. How do I subvert that? Like, how many ways can I kind of like give you the finger and be like, no, like, I was not built for your labor. I was not built to build out your empires. That is not my purpose in life. That is not the purpose of millions of people on the globe's lives. My mother really like centering it. I mean, like, I remember like one of the earliest things I read, Orlando Patterson, Slavery and the Social Death, that clarified for me. I was like, oh my God, the way that he was writing about this idea of like this exclusionary politic that is built essentially around the fact that like there is a group that is always truly excluded, which Blackness in and of itself is excluded from these larger frameworks on purpose. It was just very clarifying for me. And so I think that Afro-pessimism for me, especially as I was a teen, I wouldn't say I wasn't organizing yet, but I got actually personally politically active around 12, and I was doing work with abortion care. Like, that was my cause, you know. It was like very like, you know, very like girl boss feminism at the time. Like, it hadn't been fully fleshed out. So I was just like, I want abortions, you know? And like that was enough to get me outside. And then it's like I get into these spaces and I'm like, why am I dealing with racial violence? Why is this happening? Like, we all have a shared goal. And it was like realizing, for me, Afro-pessimism is just more like, it's a way to ground me, to like remind me, ultimately, you have to remember, positionally speaking, how the world is viewing you and how other people can't help but to view you because of it. Who are you? And that's something too that's like a really hard question to ask as Black folk. Like, who are you outside of Blackness? If you woke up tomorrow and you were no longer Black, like, who are you? What do you care about? Why does it matter?
Yeah, it makes me think of a question I kept asking myself after college, because Black Lives Matter happened. I don't know. I was trying to figure out how to be an adult under capitalism. And the question I kept asking was, who am I outside of what white supremacy has done to my people? And for like a good 2 years, I kept having that question. I was reading all this literature and organizing. And I think when I got into Afro-pessimism, and I love that you said it was grounding, because the admission of this sinister truth then allows me to feel safer in the world in a way. It's like I'm not lying to myself. Like when my neighbor who recently said some weird shit to me was like talking about all these little things that he wanted me to do differently about parking my bike out back. I knew that he was racist because he kept bringing up immigration in a conversation where it wasn't necessary, but he didn't know. And for me to know that, it helps me understand it a little bit. And I even think about like reading Lose Your Mother by Saidiya Hartman, and how that book is about someone returning to whatever their conception of a homeland is, and then having to shatter all of these illusions, and by the end coming to like a different place of truth. Maybe one of the reasons I like it, because how can we begin to fight back if we don't admit the extent of what has even happened? And I'm like, if it was just like some simple slavery shit like they want us to think, then it would be over by now. And that's why I liked how you talked about chattel slavery recently as well online, because when it scares people, I'm kind of like, what in this logic scares you? Do you feel like this means that it's the reality till the end of time? Because our people have killed ourselves to escape white supremacy. We've killed our masters. And so that was possible before. How can we look at our lives now and be like, no, it's not possible?
That was one of my primary motivators, also because this was very grating to me, and I've continued to talk about it. And I probably will, even though I keep saying not to dip in that bucket. But like, second the election results came in, like, I saw this like very large chasm online of Black folk breeding resentment, came all the way to the surface. It bubbled over, and you have two groups essentially who are like, all right, I'm gonna use this to get shit done, and then other people who are like, I'm gonna use this to fuck off. And I was like, no, like, and I saw this happening, and I was like, the only way you can genuinely conceive, because also my concern, and that's why I talked about it in like more recent videos, where like people are trying to spin this to be pro-Black. People are trying to spin this to be very revolutionary, to be like, rest is resistance. I want you to know that is not what they meant. Rest is resistance was resting away from labor for white capitalism. It was resting away.
MLK was resting, was about passive nonviolence, but that was resistance. So
right. Your naps aren't revolutionary. Like, that's not what they meant. That is not what they meant.
There's this narrative online now, especially around like big protests on April 5th or whatever, and people were like, Black people, we know we don't gotta go.
Stay home. They're trying to cajole us outside. That's why I was like, you know what? Somebody has to reality test. At this point, like, they don't have to cajole. That's why I said I think the video last night, I was like, they don't have to cajole you to do shit. That's the point. If they needed your permission, we would not have been in chains. Like that's the point. They didn't ask. There was no checkbox that said chattel slavery, yes or no. Like, nobody signed up for that shit. You don't get to opt out of your oppression. It doesn't stop existing because you don't want to challenge it. At this point, you just become an obstacle for other people. A lot of people are grieving. Afro-pessimism is very grounding. Afro-pessimism is like innately like reconciling with our mortality. It's reconciling with the grief that comes from knowing you are in the perhaps only group that was built to labor and die exclusively. That's it. That is all they need of you. That is all they want of you. In any other capacity, you are subhuman. Once you get to that understanding, you're like, actually, being outside doing this work is asserting my personhood. It is meaning I'm alive. I'm trying to be alive for the first time, like truly within this, because in a lot of ways, if you wanted to like make it comparative in this larger socio-political landscape, we are zombies in this understanding. Like we are the walking dead. We have a purpose and then we're supposed to die. If you really want to reject that, you can't do that at home. You have to assert personhood, and you can't assert personhood in your revolutionary naps. Like that just doesn't work. Like when I saw all of these videos, and it was like really grating too, because I started to see like historians and stuff get online and talk about this, and I'm like, I know you're not saying this. Pull that African American Studies PhD out the bio. How in the fuck is this how is that the logic to be like, y'all know who they waiting for? I'm asking these questions, I'm talking to people about it. The people were saying things like this. The through line, I guess, the logic is like, white folks always need us to do their work. I'm like, oh, that's where we're not understanding the same thing. This isn't their work. This isn't their work. This is not their work. Like people have literally said that to me, where they're like, white folks have to fight for themselves for once. Oh, they did. They
We were
did.
fighting for them before. We were fighting for them.
Like they did. It's called colonialism. It's called chattel slavery. They fought for themselves by enslaving your ancestors. Like that was their fight. This is not their fight. And then so I think for a lot of people, it's like a genuine misunderstanding of who their enemy is. And like that's part of the reason why all of this like weird talk has come out recently, where folks are like, honestly, we should have stayed segregated. Black folks want to be integrated, is why this happened. Yeah, that's why this happened. Like this, it's just really strange.
Garveyism is coming back a little bit of, I might work with the KKK just because we want to be separate kind of vibe.
Like it's and it's just like, do you hear yourselves? Like, and so it's like sometimes really it's just about putting a mirror up to someone to be like, this is what you just said to me. And they're like, no, it's not. And I'm like, no, that's literally what you just said to me. That's literally what you just said to me. I do feel like there's this obligation, being someone who like already has this understanding, to make it as, again, accessible as possible, but also to make sure people are actually truly internalizing what I'm saying. It is not enough to know that your ancestors were property. That's not enough. I think a lot of people think it's enough. The way that they're trying to do everything, you know, between like the anti-DEI and like the attacks on education, like they want to flatten that as much as they can already, but I don't think people realize the full scope of what's already been flattened. So it's like you're already reading or internalizing a very diluted, misconstructed history of your people. This part of the reason why people think that like resistance in the midst of a large fight against these huge structures is useless. But it's like the Haitian Revolution was a 13-year-long war. Prior to that, they had over 140 revolts. These things take time. In the same regard, and I think people don't know how to conceptualize that either, it's like your oppression took time. They didn't get this done in a year. They dedicated centuries of European life to being evil, and it worked.
Yeah, what you're saying makes me think about the difference between survival and liberation, and how so much of American Blackness, I think, is. I mean, it's like we're kind of using the same language, but I think online some people are talking about literally surviving, and then other people are speaking towards liberation. And I really think of it in terms of the people that think we can survive by being compliant to the pain that is being inflicted upon other people that will eventually come onto ourselves. That to me is literally the logic of colonization and policing. If folks aren't to a point yet where they see that, then compliance does look like you kind of outsmarting the other side, or it does look like you doing what you need to do to get by so you can get home to your kids or whatever. And like that could either be a cop saying that, or it could be a mom trying to get home from her job. What does that mean? And for Black folks especially, like I think it's one of the reasons that I was so interested in talking a lot about the election online, because I do think there's just so much assumptions around we've already done enough, like they got to finish it. And I'm like, we've already done enough. Our ancestors have already done enough. Like they've been martyred.
Yes.
We haven't been martyred yet.
Like meaning that the work isn't done. A lot of the issue that like maybe you see more when you're talking about radical politics on the left, one of the reasons they don't have this issue on the right is because like they're very brazen about the fact that they are self-preservationists, and that's maybe the one thing I will give them. I don't think that's an innately bad thing. A lot of us do want to survive, but build on the survival. Part of the problem I think with like the way people sometimes are conceiving more radical politics that's like rooted in collectivism is like this belief you have to disregard the fact that you came into this for self-preservation. You came into this in a way that maybe to you seems selfish. That doesn't mean you can't end up in a place where it is about more than just you and yours. Like it can be about people bigger than your immediate family or the ones that you care about. That's why I said a lot of people don't like that, where I'm like, right is outside, conservatives are outside, Christians are outside, because they are telling people it is okay to want to save yourself and I'm going to give you the tools to do so. It's like, that's the one thing they're good at. That is a good thing. You do want to be catching people who are so occupied with survival, they'll do damn near anything, because as opposed to their anything being racial terrorists, their anything can be excising themselves from capitalism, rejecting imperialism. Their anything can be transmuted into something good. So it's like, I'm never one of those people that's going to shy away from the fact that like folks genuinely a lot of the time do just want to survive, but it's about letting you know this is about survival, but this is about long-term survival. This is about ensuring the survival of your kids and your future descendants. People haven't fully conceptualize the fact that they are living in a legacy of people surviving already, but that survival had a cost. Like that's the point. There is sacrifice innately. Like there are people, for us, there are potentially how long you can trace your family. Like I can trace my family back. My cousin works for the Genealogical Society. He's done extensive research. We can trace family back to the 1700s, actively on plantations in Virginia. So that's rare. A lot of Black folks can't do that. Like I'm lucky in that sense. It was very eye-opening in the way that like, fuck, that's how many generations it took for people to see freedom. Like so many people lived and died in chains. That wasn't a sacrifice anybody asked for. The persistence to survive, the persistence to revolt, the persistence to still try to like find joy and love within each other where you can. That's the through line of all of this. And I do think there is an obligation for us to be that cog for somebody else in a wheel. I would love to think that in 100 years there will be children who do not have to live under the strain of like racial terror, under colonialism, people who live in a world that is actually functioning for each other. And I would love them to be like, damn, they did all of this to ensure this world would happen. That world doesn't just come one day. You don't wake up and then the world is different. The world is being shaped all the time by people.
Some real labor.
Yeah, y'all aren't resting from your job because you need to survive, right? So it's like, if you saw this as a survival tactic, you would not be talking like this. Rest ain't resisting when you need a check so you can pay rent. You know you need to survive. You know there are tools to survival. It's like, why are you only extending your capacity to sacrifice when it is compulsory? That is not the sacrifice that matters much. If you are being forced to do it, if starve or labor are the options, you're going to labor. Why not, for the first time in your life, perhaps, sacrifice on purpose so that other people don't have to? That is possible.
One thing I love, especially from the lineage that I find myself in now, is the amount of archival work that has been done and like the amount of access to information. Like I feel so lucky being in the age I'm in right now, where I'm like, okay, we went through these things in the 70s, 80s, 90s, built care for the militants and for folks who were organizing that got incarcerated and locked up, and kept that energy moving in a way that like we have even an archive and lineage of political thought from people behind the walls and behind like even further in enemy lines than we are right now. You've stated a lot that right now it's not really given 1930s, 1940s, is given like 1890s, is given Gilded Ages. And I'm kind of curious, what are some of like those historical touch points that you see from Reconstruction, from the Gilded Ages, that you think of important now when thinking of collective liberation?
To me, the clearest was like this reestablishment of the racial hierarchy and its legitimization through the courts. I mean, like the second you got that super conservative majority, I was like, yeah, it's looking very Plessy v. Ferguson outside. It's very separate but equal outside. Yeah, super majority on the court. They're gonna be saying all kinds of fuck shit on purpose with a smile on their face. And then when I started to like look at the economy, I started to look at the way that people were viewing politics and this idea of like collectivism being the disease rather than the cure. I was like, this is the Gilded Age. In the Gilded Age, there was this issue of essentially a lot of like disgruntled whites who were upset that there was all of this immigration coming from Eastern Europe, particularly in Central Europe, that was stealing jobs, and da-da-da. And I'm like, y'all are saying the same shit. What's maybe most interesting, as opposed to like, again, a Germany situation, is that it was still very much marked by our very recent history of enslavement. When you look at the Gilded Age, we're talking about less than 50 years out from emancipation. There was an 8-year period, truly, where the country was willing to reconcile with what they had done, which is why we, call it Reconstruction. They failed at their project on purpose because, again, a white man wanted to consolidate his power. We have a president come in, Rutherford, and he's like, hey, like, I need those electoral votes from the South. And they're like, you don't get those unless you let us be evil. And he's like, sure. And he pulls the military. All of this progress that had been made in 8 years. Again, we had Black sitting reps. Black people were voting, owning land, and then it all got ripped from them because a white man wanted to be president. Like, that is this country's legacy. Is that not what is given now? White celebrity wants to be president. let him do racist shit. We're living in that. We're living in like this packed court that wants to reestablish a racial caste system. We have like the encroachment of reproductive rights. Like all of this was happening. I think a lot of people too, the reason it's easier to see something like 1930s Germany is because people have, typically speaking, unless you're talking about like, again, your truest, most Nazi white supremacists, will acknowledge that it was horrific. People want to root people in a reality that you cannot argue was for the betterment of any people. But a lot of people don't know how to reconcile with the fact that genuinely a lot of folks still think slavery was not bad. They still think Reconstruction was good. They think that once the shackles technically were off, like we've been complaining ever since for no reason, people don't have a real conception of the true terror that was occurring here and is still occurring here. And so I understand why people are like leaning heavier on the Nazi Germany comparison, because people aren't going to typically argue with you about whether or not it was actually evil. You know, like the only people who are going to be like, well, actually, are going to be Nazis. So like you expect that. The idea that there is an undercurrent, and that goes back to Afro-pessimism, the undercurrent that Black folks are not people. So it's like our struggle, you don't even conceive it the same way. You don't think of it the same way. The reason that it was horrifying to Europe that this was happening is because they looked like you. Like they looked like you. They didn't look like me. The first people they disappeared were like Romani people and Black Germans, and then LGBTQ Germans, and then once they started to like openly attack the whitest looking ones left, they were like, oh my God, we have to do something. Our neighbors. And it's like, I guess we are neighbors. I guess we are neighbors.
We're strangers.
Yeah, I'm like,
yeah, fascism existed before 1920.
I'm like, I don't know. I'm like, they disappeared plenty of us. They genocided plenty of us. I didn't realize that wasn't horrifying to you. So that's what I'm saying. Where like people haven't even reconciled with the true soullessness of the racial caste system we have been experiencing here. If you genuinely thought that that was horrific, that that was horrible, you would be way more invested in making sure it cannot persist. Also, I think it's very strategic, and like it plays into American exceptionalism, right? To be like, they were the good guys. Think about how we talk about the world wars, like how you taught the world wars. Like we didn't get involved because of niceties. We got involved because they bombed the US. Like we were sitting out. We were manufacturing and selling weapons to both sides.
We didn't even recognize Hawaii as a state, I believe, until
Pearl Harbor. That's what I'm saying. So it's like, and that was because you're like, oh, you're encroaching on our territory. Oh, not that fuck shit. It had nothing to do with wanting to liberate people from genociding. Like this has everything to do with, again, the US maintaining cultural hegemony, maintaining power on the global stage. People don't know how to interrogate the motives of the US in a way that still centers enslavement. People, they understand that a genocide of indigenous people had to happen in order for this to be a settler colony. And the settler colony was built out by forced enslaved people's labor. Like that's it. If you see that as simple in a way that it is, like we don't have to complicate it. We don't have to like reinvent the wheel. We know this. It was a very unique form of slavery. It was the most stringent race relations within this context that we've ever seen. It's part of the reason why you can't have these same conversations depending on where you travel or where your friends are from, because their race relations look a lot different, because there was a path to citizenship, because people were able to breed into freedom. They were able to marry into freedom. That was not an option here. We had the one drop rule. So it's like when you explain to people like, no, US politics will always ultimately come down to these racial conflicts because that's how it was invented. We would not have power without it. People can't fully conceptualize that. We aren't seen as a community that was preyed on like unjustly is kind of the point. And it's like, but people can see that in Germany. 1930s Germany is horrifically evil. This should not have happened to people. If you genuinely felt that same way about chattel slavery and its derivatives, because we've never really escaped the plantation, we're living in the plantation politic all day. If you really believe that, like you wouldn't even need to look anywhere else. This country has its own history. We are a very, relatively speaking, for other countries that are global powers, we are the youngest of them for the most part. You don't have to look 1,000 years back to figure out when Romans conquered this area and subsumed everyone into their group. Y'all are intentionally not looking at less than 300 years of history. This is very recent history. The Germany shit was confusing to me at first until I remembered like, oh, we're not human still. That's why everybody is running towards Germany. They aren't even fully conceiving that this was like a horrific thing that happened to people. They think slavery's bad in theory, but it's bad when it happens to people. If you think we're really people, you would not be like, oh, you know, we don't have these issues anymore. You know, that was a European thing at that point. And it wasn't. Like, again, the 1890s, like, we get Plessy v. Ferguson, you get the robber barons, the oil barons, like, the stock barons. This is where, like, you get all this consolidation of wealth. This is how we saw, like, our first real oligarchy in the States is what led to, like, the Sherman Antitrust Act, you know, a few years later, to break up these monopolies that these corporations had built out because of industrialization. We're in the same place. And I think it is important to root everything that we think about in regards to the US in our history, because our history is already reconstructed to serve whiteness. So it's like, I don't want us to be walking away from the history of blackness here, because again, like I said in a video about it, I guess ended up on Reddit, and like I got a slew of like hate from it or whatever. Your evil Germans, they got it from here. Like, why are you acting like you don't know this? Even if you're like, oh my God, 1930s Germany was a horrific evil. I'm like, yeah. And the mustache man was like, yo, the States, he was like, the States had it good. Like Jim Crow, black codes.
APA citation, MLA citation.
The gas bath.
Right. He's like, they were cooking. And then on top of that, he goes, and then what happens again? Like, that's why I'm like, there's all of this erasure of violence against African people and folks that are descendants of chattel slavery, because he didn't even start in Europe. They went to the continent. Like, they tested these things out in the continent. They genocided indigenous groups in Africa. They were figuring out how to make this work. They were figuring out how to make this work because we did it so well. What does that say about this place? If the people that you think are the most evil civilization in history cited, they're not lying. They're like, yo, shout out to y'all. Y'all did this phenomenally. I'm gonna send you flowers. If evil people are giving the US flowers for how evil they are to us, how in the fuck could you not think this is ultimately reconciliation with a racial conflict that has been here the entire time? They were very fascinated in the fact that there had been two lanes, that they were able to create secondary class citizenship to try to eradicate a people. Like, that process in and of itself, that's why they were very invested in Jim Crow. They were like, wow, if we make them second class citizens, it'll be easier to extinguish them altogether. It's like, yeah, when black folks are like, we're here, you're not treating us like we're here, we're second class citizens, folks are like, oh my God, you're off the plantation, shut the fuck up. And it's like, I
don't know about that one.
I don't know.
I think about that often. I'm currently writing about Black anti-fascists in the Spanish Civil War, especially like to show the contradiction of like the US did not go in as an anti-fascist country. It came in because they got hit. There were anti-fascists here, and all the Black ones that came drew the through line from the beginning. Yeah, no, my consciousness started at birth, being in the Mississippi with the lynchings and all this racial terror. And yeah, it was 5 this week and my uncle the next week. That's just how day-to-day life went. So at 16, I moved north, and then all these unemployment organizing stuff that was happening, and how it's very much tied into like that sort of liberation work and international work is tied into that. What kind of acts, individual or collective, are you practicing or developing or experimenting right now that are helping ground you in this political like climate and moment? How do you find your bliss even though you're not ignorant?
It's definitely difficult. I'm waxing and waiting. As I get older, it's like the things that used to fatigue me a lot fatigue me less, but like when they do tire me, it tires me longer, if that makes sense. Because it's like you just kind of like having to persist. I'm like always saying, anybody that knows me, I'm like, we move through despair. Like, we have to keep moving. We have to keep moving. That's not always an easy thing to do. But one of the things that does help with doing that is anytime I get to see something meaningful happen because of the labor that I or other people are doing. It is something for me as simple as getting someone to understand something a lot of times feels like a victory. There's so many obstacles to understanding this. Like, the fact that I am able to help you get here to me is proof that like it just makes sense, that like even on my worst day, it doesn't mean that this doesn't matter. I think sometimes it's so easy to feel inconsequential. Like, a lot of this in the grand scheme of things isn't gonna mean shit if I know that I've helped one person. And it always seems to be perfectly timely, where like I'm having a shitty day, I'm like, yo, why am I even doing this? Forget everything about this, move to Bali, be a colonizer. Why the fuck are you doing this for real? Almost immediately I'll like get a text from a friend, somebody will send me something, or I'll get like this really like moving, profound email or DM, and I'm like, all right, there's a point to this again. Like, I think for me, it's just trying to break up between like action and despair. Like, when you sit down a little too long, it like all hits you at once. You want to keep moving sometimes to avoid that feeling. Sometimes I just sit in that feeling, allowing myself, one, to like continue to grieve like the ease I would want. I'm not going to sit here and act like I'm not sometimes like longingly looking at people who genuinely, and I used to think it was like a myth, but like people really walk through the world okay. Like, they don't think about any of this. They just live their lives. They're like, oh, we're getting jet skis and we're gonna go to Hawaii on vacay. Damn, you don't even think about, you don't have to think about these political implications. You don't think about what this means for your, personal understanding of the world. So for me, like, grounding a lot of the time is about like allowing myself to feel whatever it is that I'm feeling currently, and then just not laying in that feeling permanently if I can, but also like giving it time to move through me. I think a lot of these processes, again, is about patience. It's a long game. It's a marathon. The same way you would have to like rehab muscles and like maybe not run every day or run less miles. It's the exact same thing, like in an emotional and sociopolitical capacity. And so for me, a lot of grounding is being around children is really grounding. Being around elders is really grounding. It's nice to see the start and towards the end of life. Being able to see that, full spectrum is like really illuminating sometimes. You know how it is, like you're around a kid and they'll say some accidentally really profound shit and you're like, what? Where you get that from? You're 9. Like, where did that come from? That's very grounding for me to know that there are people who have lived and that will live and that will continue to live their lives in ways that could be impactful for other people. I think a lot of the times too, it's very grounding for me to just like be out in nature. And I think that's part of the reason why a lot of us are like, go outside, be outside, like see how much bigger it all is, like see how everything is a part of something larger. One of the like most profound emotional moments for me was when I started like gardening, and then when I was going to start harvesting things that I had gardened and like seeing how deeply the roots had gone. I was searching in these raised beds for potatoes and shit, and I'm like, damn, how'd you get that far? I didn't even plant you that deep. When did this happen? And it was like at the very end of that, I was like, oh my god, they created this entire network under the soil to be with each other. Like it was just very grounding to know that things are larger than your biggest problems. Sometimes these are problems, but also your potatoes are gonna do what they do. You're gonna be out in the garden and a bee is gonna land on you and you're gonna want to pass the fuck out. The most grounding thing for me is just trying to experience nature in and of itself, put my feet on like some warm land and look around and see the sky and look at birds and think about like, oh, do birds think about things? Sometimes just like having like silly little, inconsequential thoughts about the world is really grounding. Like in a political sense was grounding a lot of time too. And I think that's why I was always so invested in history, seeing that I'm not alone in this feeling, that people have despaired and then still sometimes you get your biggest victories after it. That's what keeps you going, the things that work, and knowing that like if it doesn't work now, you can tweak it, you can learn a new way, you can try it again, you can, maybe this isn't even for you. I think that's something too that a lot of people don't really get told when you come into like any form of like real meaningful or sizable organizing or activism. Every lane is not yours. Know where you sit, know what you're good at, know what you're capable of giving again and again and again, and do that. I think a lot of the time it's hard to stay grounded if you're doing something that doesn't really suit you. Everybody has a role to play, you know what I mean? And so it's like if you're playing a role that you think you have to play, it can be very tiring, it can be very taxing politically, where you're like, I don't even enjoy this type of work. I always tell people, rest your work in something that matters to you. If you're a chef, start teaching low-income people how to cook cheaper, how to make food accessible. If you love to teach people shit like that, do that. I'm a motor mouth. I talk all day. So it's like, yes, if at like the organizer rally, you could give me the mega one. Like, if you need me to talk to strangers, I can do that. I'm very personable in that way. Taking the things that you love, letting it promote you to a place that matters, into something that you want to see done. Again, when I think about my mother, who's like very much like, especially more so than me, she's like very reserved, very laid back, an observer. When I would see her in these spaces, has this very sharp analytical mind, and she like always had the pieces together, and it's like this was her lane. So don't hand her, the bullhorn necessarily. She's gonna help you negotiate something. She's gonna help you get to an aim because she's using the part that makes her feel alive. I stay grounded in the fact that I make sure to do stuff that is naturally rewarding for me. I do get a lot of gratification out of talking to people, out of educating, out of making things accessible. That makes me feel very good. It makes me feel like a lot of us in some way seek a purpose a lot of the time. Like it's very existential as well. I do feel like I wouldn't have been given these tools had this not been made for me, had this not been suited for me. Taking what you have, making it work, and allowing yourself to like feel the shitty when the shitty comes. It doesn't require that you every day think it's going to be the day or that things are going to work out. I can't act like I've never had doubt. I do doubt. I think we all doubt to some degree sometimes, especially if you like are coming off like a really big loss or something you were really fired up about just doesn't go to the way that you thought it would. You're like, damn, wow. Like, and having to sit in those feelings. So much of the issues that we're in generally in society has to do with the fact that we are taught not to confront things, not to confront the hard stuff. You put it away, you put it in the closet, you suppress until you explode. That's why everybody and their mother like calls himself a crash out now. It's like you doing that because you're not having to sit with like all of this during the day. Let yourself really experience these things, because also the second you're willing to sit in the fullest capacity of your despair, that's when you have access to a larger capacity for joy. All has to be able to be felt. You can't only feel the really, really good shit or the really, really bad shit. They kind of like have to work in tandem. And so for me, it's like really grounding to just be among other people, to be among people who have different concerns. Their lives look a lot different than mine. My aunt, she's like really close. I don't even know how this whole happened, but my aunt is really close with like her Amish community. When I go and visit my aunt, sometimes I will go with her to like visit her Amish friends, living very simply, gratifying for them. It is rewarding to live like that for them. And they also make really great baked goods. Like they are phenomenal bakers. It's legit. The first time I had sticky buns when I went with her to like her Amish, I was like, you think they'll give me something to take home? Did they make enough? Being around these people who, on its face, we are so diametrically opposed. Like we live very different lives. They live very insulated lives amongst their community. They're very isolated for the most part. They kind of engage with the English world, as they call it, when they have to. But like even this idea that they, would develop a relationship with like a technically English woman, as in, non-Amish woman, and then like let her bring her family, visit them. They have extended family that she goes to stay with sometimes. At the end of the day, humans are pro-social creatures. We want to be around each other. We want to commune, and we tend to, unless again these larger structures are preventing it, we want to find common ground. Even if that common ground is literally just breaking bread, it's something. I think that is like very grounding for me to know that you don't have to speak the same language to want the same things. You don't have to think the same way to want to be around people and to think people deserve like good life, to good quality of life. And so that is just really grounding, just being around people. I think it's harder to despair in community. I mean, you obviously still will, and there's like a collective grief that can overtake you, and that has to move through everybody. It is something to say about just having someone there to bust it up and be like, hey, look, we see each other right now. That's enough today. That's like really important to me. So I try to have some face-to-face time with people, preferably the people that I like already know and like care about, so you don't get like the whammy, where you're like, oh, we're cool, and then somebody says something super wild, you're like, wait, I thought I didn't know that's what this was. Like, I'm sorry. To avoid that kind of outcome. So it's like being around people that I know just genuinely want to see each other is like really grounding. It feels like you are unseen in a lot of ways. And a lot of us are seeking being sought out and being seen, and people saying you matter. That's why it's called Black Lives Matter. You matter. Like, that's the point. People don't really feel they matter. They don't feel like their lives mean anything. And it's like, maybe what makes it mean something is these relationships that you make. Maybe it's the way that you choose to go out into the world with other people. Maybe it's what you plan to leave. I think the idea of legacy too gets really perverted in that sense, where it's like your legacy can be these good works. It can just be your life. Legacy at the end of the day is just like something that happens. It's not something you intend to craft. I think what's grounding is like being around people who have similar issues, who have similar thoughts, but who also have like a host of other diverse things that they are concerned with. If I'm with my nephews or something, a 9-year-old is not worried about whether or not he gonna have like healthcare, you know what I mean? In like a couple years, he's worried about like why I'm fucking up his score in Fortnite. And it's like, that's enough. When he's like, hand me the remote. Oh, sorry, but like that's grounded. For a kid to be like, you're bad at this. Don't do that. Don't fuck up my scores. Like, actually just watch me play. And it's like, oh wow, that is very grounding. It really is. For a kid to be like, you suck, love you. That's very grounding. It's the little things.
So that was part 1 of our conversation with Nia Allah. Part 2 comes out next week, so y'all are gonna have to stay tuned. But if you're chomping at the bit for more, like I expect you to be, you can go check out That Deep, Substack that Nia runs and writes. And then you can also check them out on Instagram at Shaking Sheets and on TikTok at Nia Allah. Next week, we explore some of the themes and more political analysis around sex work, and the way our culture consumes the erotic. Hey listeners, this is The Dugout, and we're all about sharing Black radical history and ideas to spark learning and action. If you've gained something from these conversations, you might want to consider supporting us on the Patreon. Your support helps us cover production costs, bringing on amazing guests, and create resources for deeper education. Plus, you'll get early access to the interviews and exclusive reading episodes. Head to patreon.com/thedugoutpod and join. Keep this work going.